Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, the 29th of September, 2020. It's 5:37 p.m. I'll call the Lubbock City Council meeting to order. Mr. Harris?
The Planning and Zoning Commission is now open for session also.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We're in a joint meeting tonight, Lubbock City Council and the Lubbock Planning and Zoning Commission. The first item on our agenda tonight is item 1, citizen comments. We had no one sign up to make citizen comments this evening. So we will go now to item number 2, and it's to hold a joint city council meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission to discuss and hear a presentation from staff and from Keys Collaborative on the following. Module 2 of the Unified Development Code, which includes an update to the existing downtown zoning regulations, including districts, land use standards, building design, placement, and parking regulations. Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, Planning and Zoning Commission. Appreciate everybody being here this evening. Mr. Brian Isom, our Planning Director, is going to come up and set the stage for tonight's events.
Mr. Isom, you'll need to turn your microphone on, if you would, please. And while you're coming up, I might add that we do not have any Lubbock City Council members joining us tonight via Zoom. So just the 6 of us that are in the room, and I don't believe we have any Planning and Zoning Commission members joining us that way. I know one of our consultants is joining us via Zoom. Mr. Isom.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning Department is very excited to keep moving this ball forward. We've kind of been holding back since February on our in-site visit, but tonight is the on-site visit from our consultants, Keys Collaborative, as well as virtually with Dover Cole. So in-house tonight we have Brian Mabry and Brett Keast with Keys Collaborative, and then online virtually we have Allie Burkhalter and Jason King with Dover Cole and Partners. So I'll kick it off. Brian will start the presentation here in just a second. Then I believe Allie and Jason will continue virtually, but we're all here for any questions that you guys have.
Ms. Patterson-Harris, do you have a question? Comment?
I don't have a question, I have a comment. I like the way Ms. Isom say we're going to kick it off.
Thank you.
Made me feel at home.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson-Harris. Brian, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon to everyone, commissioners and city council members. Brian Mabry from Keys Collaborative. Jason remotely will be advancing the slides for me. I just have a few housekeeping items before we get to the fun part that Dover Cole gets to talk about. So if we could go to the next slide. Just to give a broad overview of this project and where we are in the process, we started off some time ago with kickoff and stakeholder interviews where we tried to learn as much as we can about Lubbock and what makes it tick zoning-wise and subdivision-wise and urban design-wise and all of those type of things. And went on to do a code critique where we pointed out some areas where your zoning documents and subdivision documents could improve and how they could be combined into a unified development code, which is the project we're working on now, which is sort of a one-stop document that relates to zoning, landscaping, signs, subdivision, urban design, and things of that nature. We are now in the point of drafting modules and pieces so that they're a little easier to review than one large document given to you at one time toward the end of the process. We want you to be informed as we go through this, and we hope we're doing a good job with that. We will move forward down the kind of inverted pyramid there to eventually public hearings, because this is an ordinance, and the Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing on the Unified Development Code next year early on, and then eventually in spring of next year we will move forward adoption, where the City Council will have the final say on your new Unified Development Code. Next slide. There are three kind of overarching goals that we've talked about from the beginning and that you all had in your RFP, your request for proposals, when it came out looking for someone to do this job. Implementation of the comprehensive plan is always job one from a unified development code perspective. The comprehensive plan, your new plan, has policies about growth that tend to be rather broad and descriptive. A unified development code is the legal document that puts those policies into action and into reality and brings them to life. A unified development code is a legal document, and so there are some legalities in it that we have to hold to, but we also try to make it as readable and understandable to the average person as we possibly can. Another goal was to, as I mentioned, do a code critique and analysis of your existing documents and note how they could improve and incorporate those improvements into the Unified Development Code. And then finally, just of course, combining everything together into the document itself, a document that is, again, user-friendly, but also legally defensible. Next slide. I mentioned how we provide to you modules of the Unified Development Code. We've given you and had a discussion earlier this year about Module 1, which is related to kind of the conventional zoning districts where design is important, but it's not at a priority like it is in the mixed-use districts that we're going to talk about tonight. So Module 1 was kind of the general provisions, the legalese that we have to have in the document to make it effective, and then the residential and non-residential zoning districts and the land uses that go along with them. Tonight, again, is Module 2, where we'll be talking about mixed-use zoning districts that are primarily focused downtown, and the building and design standards that go along with those mixed-use districts. You can look forward to discussions like this in the future for Modules 3 and 4 related to site design and subdivision design. And what I mean by site design is landscaping, signs, parking. And what I mean by subdivision design is the rules that go along with platting property, where you're dividing large properties into smaller lots for building homes on them or whatever the case may be. And then the fourth module will be procedural. It'll be about how rezonings are, what the process is for a rezoning or the process for a variance and those kinds of things, along with nonconformities, which are the things that were built before the Unified Development Code went into effect, and the parameters that would go along with them. We would also be providing with each module definitions. Those are important to help people understand what exactly we're talking about when we use certain terms in these documents. So we're providing definitions as well each time.
Brian, before you go to the next slide.
Yes, sir.
Council, I know when you want to talk, I can see it up here, but commissioners, if you guys have a question or comment, if you'll just get my attention, I'll recognize you. It needs to be an interactive session, so if you have questions as we go through, certainly let's let Brian or the other presenters know.
Sure.
I don't have to tell these guys that. Thank you. Please continue.
Sure. Next slide, Jason. And with that, I'm turning it over to Jason and Allie with Dover Cole, who are going to get into the real heart of the matter for this module. Thank you.
Excellent. Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, City Council people, commissioners, members of the public. I trust that you can hear me. I apologize that we're not there in person. Allie and I both wish we were in Lubbock tonight. We always have a great time with just terrific people. This is the slide where I say that our firm has been doing codes all around the country and all around the world, along with other design for a long time. And the code is really important. The code, as Brian said, is where it all comes together. The visioning and the comprehensive plan becomes the law that is in the code. Without codifying your ideas and your visions, they do not become reality. So thank you for this. Last time we were in town, the world was so different. In September, we all could get together in a room without masks or distancing, and it was wonderful. We took it for granted, and we had a truly phenomenal conversation about the future with a variety of people presenting to us, the consultants in the back of the room, listening to the public as they talked about their idea for the future. And then we went out into the community and we talked to people where they worked and where they lived and where they shopped. And we made code as interesting as we could because the people in Lubbock are really interesting people. And then what we did is we created a lot of visualizations. We looked at areas like this that look like they're built out and they're done and they work. And we were saying, you know, what if? What if you find the space in between buildings and you maximize the potential and you make the downtown, once again, the center of community life? And then, you know, a rendering like this is impossible under the current regulations. Our job was to make it possible. There's two parts that we got to work on, and it's the form-based coding, where you care more about the form than other things. And it's in the downtown area, and it also creates a new set of rules for walkable mixed-use communities outside of the downtown. And the map looks very similar to the map you know, the zoning map. The lines are the same. What we've done is we've increased the number of options that property owners have, you know, and we've increased the developable area. And what we ask of them is very little. It's really just to continue to build downtown great buildings like Lubbock has been building for a very long time. So, and these are called mixed-use zones because they make it easier to have a variety of uses. And we've tried to make the code as visually interesting and as understandable as possible. So you see pictures of different buildings that people like. We said, take us to your best, you know, local Main Street. Take us to your best spot where the buildings are tall and there's a lot of people, or your best neighborhood park. And we wrote down the rules and we codified those. And you see some of them in the pictures here. And we tailored each one of the areas for the spot. So the way the code works is it starts very, very general and then it gets specific. In the general mixed use standards, there are requirements about architecture and open space and landscaping and parking standards and lighting and street standards. It's important to note that for the city for a very long time had the downtown public improvement design standards. And Allie, our chief code writer, liked those, and she incorporated all of those into the code and gave them teeth and meaning and importance and made them part of the law too. And that's important to build a public realm. The other thing about this is from here on, all parking in these areas goes behind new buildings. We do that in order so that way parking isn't the dominant visual image. Lubbock is rebuilding, you know, and we want there to be plenty of parking. There needs to be. We just don't want that. Just no one's going to put a picture of a parking lot on a postcard of the Lubbock of the future. And so parking behind the buildings. And sometimes the parking is itself the building, you know, and parking structures, instead of this, the parking structures should have a bottom floor. There should be something going on. They should be lined. They should be protected. Or even more ideal, the code talks about requirements and also incentives. Requirements and incentives in order to make parking garages absolutely invisible and disappear within the urbanism. You need parking garages going forward. You're talking about them already. They can be assets. They can add to quality of life and add parking. The next piece is the district-specific standards: building form, building placement, building location, and how the building interacts with the street. And then there's the special requirements. And the special requirements are, you know, a lot of the stuff that people want to see in the new downtown kind of find their way into the special requirements. And the first thing you have to do is you can't put too onerous a burden on anyone. You have to identify what are your main streets, your primary grid, the streets that people will walk, and walking will be the dominant mode of transportation. And there's not actually that many of them. There's like 10 of them. And then the other ones are ones where, you know, you ask less of the buildings. And this is absolutely in sync with your new comprehensive plan. Certain streets get certain requirements to create a great public realm. So the space between the buildings is a spot where people want to be. And this means bringing the buildings up to the street, and it also gets into how the building should look. And then there's another thing, you know, during the charrette, people were showing us these pictures of what Lubbock looked like. And you've probably seen them, and they had big, huge wrought iron galleries over the sidewalks. And then there were these arcades, and there was all this great blade signs. What we're trying to do is make that stuff allowed again, just recommend it. Awnings, the big galleries of any kind, become legal again. And in the cities where this has happened, I think of Montgomery, Alabama, or Washington, D.C., Oakland, California, El Paso, Texas, you start to have awnings, and you start to have these marquees and these colonnades. You start to have spaces for pedestrians. The other thing that we're doing is we're recommending what shop fronts should look like. There's a lost art to the shop front. Essentially, you're going to need glass, and people need to see. They need to browse see the stuff that they might want to be able to purchase. That makes the street interesting, and interesting is essential to having pedestrians. We did a lot of renderings in the charrette, and then we codified them. And we would put in a new building where there's a gap currently. So much revitalization is happening already around the Crest building. Crest buildings are the nicest buildings in every downtown, usually. And when it comes to regeneration, it happens there. And the thing is, you don't want to spoil it. You want to make use of that opportunity. The new buildings, here's everything in one image. The building's close, there's an awning above it, there's plenty of glass, and it's an interesting environment that people want to walk by, that kind of thing. And now there are spots where this is optional, very optional, because it's spots that people talked about ambitiously. The tracks between Buddy Holly Ave and the Ave, people talked about that as a potential spot. They've seen it in other cities. Right now, it's a spot. It's for garbage and for trash and for dumped tires. But in the future, these little areas, these paseos, they've come to know, whether in Missoula, Montana, or in West Palm Beach in Florida, we've seen these alleyways turn into really cool pedestrian walkways because it's close, it's tight, it's like the urbanism of Europe, and that kind of is a possibility. The code is optional in this area, and turning the fronts of the buildings toward that walkway is encouraged, it's incentivized, and it's legal once again. The other thing, and just a couple more points here. The other thing is, in the downtown, there used to be all variety of building types, and we're adding that. We're allowing that again also. So the live-work building, you have an office on the bottom floor, you live above it, and with one mortgage, one investment, you're able to live in the downtown and work. That's a hard thing to do right now under the current regulations. One could do it. It just is very difficult. We're trying to make that easy. And then within the Arts District and the Depot District, there's a lot of, there's glass blowing, and there's steel work, and there's candles being made and exported far away, pottery. These are the shops, and we want to make those possible again too. But a shop's got to be a good neighbor. For a shop to be next to a coffee shop or a residence, there are certain requirements about how it can live there decently, and that's part of the code too. So that way there can be light manufacturing. We bring that back. But we require it, there are requirements to make sure that it plays along with the other buildings. Liner buildings mean when there are large garages, like we talked about, that there's a building in front so you can look and you can see windows and not see cars. Then there's a variety of approaches. Again, you look at the old historic photographs of Lubbock and you see forecourts and terraces and open yards, the ways these buildings used to front the street to provide a welcoming sort of look. And this stuff is, again, we're incentivizing it by adding to the floor area ratio, decreasing the parking requirements, eliminating some of the setbacks. We're getting regulations out of the way so they could build like they used to back before those regulations. And the other piece is, Lubbock is growing. It's a fast growing area in the country, and even now. And what these same principles can be applied to new communities, new walkable mixed-use communities. We found some spots we were guided to, we had spots pointed out to us, and we drew a walkable network of streets and a mix of uses and open spaces. And we the same things that make downtowns great, we applied and we made possible in these other areas. You know, nothing's ever really going to compete with the downtown. Downtowns are always one of a kind and unique, 100 years of history, but you can create wonderful little walkable spots that people don't have to drive to because it's near their neighborhoods. And this same code that we're working here is the code that we've used in many places across the country. I had, as part of my presentation, like 10 places I was going to show you, and Allie cut them because she said I was going to bore you. But Buena Vista in South Maine in Colorado, you know, they have a code that you would recognize if you compared the two codes. And there are other codes, you know, there are other places. Glenwood Park and Wheeler District. There's multiple new areas in Texas and in Frisco, Texas is really cool. In parts of Miami where we are, and these new codes have created new places. And the variety that we're applying to the downtown, we also apply to these areas, though it tends to be smaller and it tends to be more parking is required. There's less likely to get incentives, less likely to get transit, but nevertheless, small local main streets. You know, a code is a complex thing, and we've had one conversation after another. We're welcome to questions, but I wanted to give you an overview, and I want to tell you that, you know, creating a new code is about the most responsible thing that a municipality can do, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be involved here in Lubbock.
Okay, Jason. Yeah, and Brian.
I was just going to close with the presentation part with this final slide that just gives you kind of a look ahead of some of the refinements of Module 2 that we're looking at for mid-October, distributing Module 3 for further review by staff. Also in mid-October, we're looking forward to our next trip in November, tentatively, of course, keeping an eye on how things shake out COVID-wise. And then, again, we're providing a very preliminary draft of that Module 4, the very procedurally oriented module, to staff as well in mid-October. And I believe that was the final part. So now we would just open ourselves up to any questions or comments that any of you might have.
Okay, Jason, thank you. Brian, thank you. So let's open the floor to questions.
I got one.
Mr. Noble.
So I was just wondering if you could speak to the mixed-use districts, the different, you know, if we got like West Broadway, General Depot, you know, are those, it looks like those are mimicking the central business districts. And if so, does that mesh with the master plan update? You know, is it, I guess, do we want to have a district, take the Depot district, for instance, you know, if that extends out to north on Buddy Holly, does that mean if somebody wants to develop on North Buddy Holly, you know, do we want them to be able to develop something that fits that district further north? And same thing coming south into the Depot district and across all of those districts.
Mr. Noble, I'll answer your question. The districts are all very similar with additional permissions given to the different characters of each area. So for West Broadway, it's given a greater setback because that's the existing character of the area. Depot District is given the option for the shop building type that we showed, the idea of the micro manufacturing for artists. So character of North Buddy Holly could still be similar in character to Broadway, mixed use district to Broadway, because they have the similar base form standards and building standards. The only additional difference would be, like I said, the shop option for micro manufacturing to encourage artists. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. And I just want to, I guess, be clear that, we want to, I think that there's a push to go away from the, just the districts and be able to develop something that is, would look good on the Broadway or meets the criteria for Broadway, West Broadway. But you could also develop that in any of the other districts, or maybe not any of them, but, we want to have flexibility to what you can build and not be pigeonholed into one, corner of downtown. It needs to be a collective downtown, potentially. Does that make sense?
The building standards are very similar throughout. The building types are almost given permission, except for residential. The general commercial type building types are similar throughout. So you will end up with a very similar character, but possibly different uses within that character based off of the needs of the different area. So it is very flexible and very generalized throughout the different districts. That's almost why we didn't go through each district separately, is because they are going to be very similar, with the exception of West Broadway having that larger setback.
Yeah, flexibility, that's what I was looking for there. Thank you.
Ms. Joy?
I think my comments kind of go to what Mr. Noble was talking about. You all have given us a very broad overview of this. There's a lot of detail in the draft that you sent about what's, and when I say draft, I'm talking about Module 2 of the Unified Development Code. It's very specific within that. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it. It's very, very detailed, but I think it does point out some of the similarities. So if you haven't had an opportunity to look at it, I think it would be a good idea to do so, because it's really broad. It doesn't talk about detail. The detail is actually in the sections of the code currently. Draft. Understand it's a draft. So if that will help, I don't know if it will, but that's where all the detail is.
Allie or Jason, why is that one section of downtown south of Broadway on the east end, why is there not a, why is that not colored? Are we not going to, I'm sure there's got to be a good reason. I guess that's the post office, maybe. I mean, is there a reason why that is not in color?
Yes.
No,
Yes,
go ahead.
we were maintaining all existing zoning lines, so we did not rezone any parcels. And that existing, I believe, is industrial of some sort. It is not currently part of the CBD districts as zoned currently.
Thank you.
The only thing I'd like to add is, as Ali said, conservatively, we stuck to the existing lines and what people were comfortable with. But codes, this is a living document. Codes do change. That we toured that area a lot, and actually on drafts we brought that back in. I will say that a lot of times a form-based code is adopted for a downtown, and then pieces are added as applicants become interested. They see something happening and they want that on their property too. The conservative way to do this, though, is stick to the existing lines and then let the applicants come to you. And in so many of the communities where we've worked, you'll see these colors coloring outside the lines, and as applicants become interested. And it's the best way to, because right now, as was mentioned, we're presenting a lot of information to property owners, and we're trying to start small with a base from which one could expand.
Thank you. Ms. Joy?
For those people who are interested in South Overton, that's a carve-out on this map, the southeast corner between not exactly Avenue Q and University and 13th and 19th. That's a carve-out for the South Overton district, for those of you who are watching out for the South Overton group.
Let's see, Mr. Atkinson and then Mr. Griffith after that. Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just build very briefly on Councilmember Joy. The South Overton is, of course, the South Overton Historical District. So that carries with it its own unique protections, and thus that's why it's set out here.
Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. King, question on, and this is a broad question, of course, but I know we're trying to simplify, and one hope is that we lessen the amount of folks that are coming to planning and zoning. And you mentioned let the applicants come. Do you feel like this actually will lessen? I mean, this type of plan lessens the load on our Planning and Zoning Commission?
It's a great question. Absolutely. You're creating a unified development ordinance. And the reason you're doing that, the reason you're updating your ordinance, is because there's a lot of things that have been coming to planning or even to the city council as the city changes that need to happen automatically going forward. And such things like the parking requirement reductions, more floor area ratio, less setbacks, a greater variety of uses. These are the things right now that's taking up a lot of your time. And it's time just to make those legal and permissible. So without exception, whenever a city does this, the Unified Development Ordinance rewrite, you're going to be decreasing frustration and hassle, staff time, councilperson time, commissioner time, so yeah, I have not seen any exceptions to that. And part of that is just we've been updating codes across the country, us, Kendon Keast, for so long. We can even see the problems ahead, the next step for Lubbock, 4 steps ahead, and we're legalizing pretty much those things before we even reach that point. So this will make life easier. This will decrease friction between residents and staff and business owners and staff.
Thank you.
Talk about Mr. De La Cruz.
I'm assuming you've done a lot of case studies, but one of the things that I see as a problem in downtown is parking. What is your idea in that scenario? Is it be public or private parking or parking garages? To what extreme are we going?
Sure. Let me just say that your new comprehensive plan, or rather your new downtown plan, talks about the need for parking. There's a section called something like Downtown for Everyone, and it talks about how unless there's a lot of parking, it just isn't downtown for everyone because people need to drive in and park. So the plan talks about structured parking garages in key areas. And there's a strategy called catchment, where those parking garages are kind of on the edge. One drives in, parks, and then walks a bit or takes their bike. what our job was to make that legal and make that possible. And even to some degree, make it even more financially feasible. So large structured parking garages are part of your future. The other thing we have to do is we still have to require parking. You know, buildings they can't build 100% of their lot. There needs to be parking on their site. But one application after another has been asking for lessened parking and even some flexibility in terms of how to add that parking. And so we've done that. And then the other part to this is on-street parking. And there is on-street parking to be added, you know, and the street sections add on-street parking, which helps. So, yeah, so, without places to park, cities just kind of stall, and we need to allow for that. At the same time, again, it can't be the dominant visual image. There's room for the parking to be located on the side or behind. There's even an alley system here which can be utilized. So aesthetics matter as well. How the parking is put in is critical.
What I'm talking about is more specific than that, and that's why I have the question. We have a lot of buildings that already, say, have 0 lot lines. So those buildings, in essence, don't have any additional space for parking. Case in point, there's some property right behind Buddy Holly Center, and it used to be, I think it was a club. Occupancy level is probably 200 to 300 people, and they're required to have a certain amount of parking available. There's no parking available to them in the current perimeters that's allowed through the city code now. So how does that equate into a solution?
Jason, do you mind if I comment first?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is
Absolutely.
Brian Isom with the Planning Department. So right now, we actually have an ordinance in process, and it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission this week, that would actually reduce parking in downtown by half of the current standards. That's what we have going forward, so as to get through Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. The goal of that was to really help us kind of test drive these parking reductions and some of the future reductions that we're getting through the new code. But I think there's been some discussions with us and our consultants about the distances allowed for shared parking agreements and things like that we're really going to flesh out with this second module. Maybe allowing additional separation between shared parking agreements. I think right now it's very limited. Looking at extending that and providing some other opportunities.
Jason, you want to add anything? Jason, would you like to add anything to that?
Just that, in the bad old days, we used to say, look, if you want to change your use from an office to a restaurant, or from automotive to a coffee shop, you had to provide parking that you never had to before, and that led to a lot of demolition. So this is more lenient when it comes to parking. Now, there will be parking problems, as was mentioned. There are some big, huge buildings down there that cannot provide parking on their lot. In those cases, we look to the master plan and the parking solutions, the structured parking, and we try to come up with ways of financing that. And that's really the only solution, district-wide parking. And as was mentioned, being clear about how far one can walk and still satisfy the parking requirement.
Thank you. Ms. Joy?
When Overland did our master plan, they identified all of the parking downtown and were amazed at how much parking we had. In fact, they said we had too much parking downtown. So we have staff now working on shared parking, which Mr. Isham mentioned. And so I think it's probably not accurate to say we didn't have enough parking. It's just not where everybody would like to park, which means in the front door. So keep in mind that there is space available, but it may not be in the location where it's most desired.
I think, council, with your permission, we've got some stakeholders here tonight that I'd like to maybe hear from, if that's okay. Mr. Taylor, any comments from you or members of the CBD TIF? Any questions or comments you guys would like to make? I'll go to the downtown. Okay. It looks like he's yielding his time to the downtown developer, Mr. McClendon.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Addressing points in sort of reverse order, Councilwoman Joy is exactly right in regarding parking and the Overland Master Plan update. You know, there's a lot to do with parking beyond just the physical space. A great deal of what we need to communicate as we implement the plan over time is communicating about wayfinding, communicating about where does you park. Nowhere else in the country do you go to an urban environment and expect to pull up to the front door and leave your car there while you do what you do. I mean, you go to Dallas, you go to Austin, you go to San Francisco, you go to any of these places, you might have to park and walk just a bit. And that's okay, because so much of what we're trying to do from the comp plan on forward is create walkable, livable, human scale spaces. So that's exactly right. There's a lot you can do policy-wise regarding parking beyond just building more and more parking. You know, the very first steps in that is managed parking, allowing for, as Mr. Isham said, the ability to share parking between uses. I've got surface lots downtown that are really busy during the day, but are absolutely appropriate for people to park at night for the hotel next door or for the restaurant going in across the street. And so enabling that kind of behaviors and easing the way for those kind of behaviors is a big part of what we're doing and a big part of what planning is doing already. So parking it's not a question of do we have enough, it is does everyone have their arms around their parking and won't share versus, and is it easy to find? Do you know where you're going and do you know where to park and is the signage good and all those sorts of things? So all of those things are great. All in all, you know, I've got some questions for the open house because, as you said, it's down in the details. But I'm excited about form-based as a whole. The one thing that I would say to council to remember, and you saw a slide about neighborhood centers in regards to form-based codes, is Mr. Holman worked very hard with council and with planning department on plan development district ordinance earlier last year. Right. The concepts of form-based codes in regards to downtown and the definitions and the comfort level with planning department and all those sorts of things doesn't end at the downtown TIF boundary ends. We're going to be pulling these concepts in to do master plan communities, and from a small scale within 2 acres inside the loop to 7 acres outside the loop. We're going to be using these concepts all over town as we go forward, and that's a good thing because the mixed use elements allow for people to have a lot of activity in their community, and I think that's really, really encouraging for us as a city. So,
thank you. Thanks for your comments, Mr. Griffith.
Since we're still in close talks about parking, we need to remind everyone that we'll start here in just a few months building another 400 spots just outside this building that will be available for evening use. So we do have, to Ms. Joy and Mr. McClendon's points, we do have quite a bit of parking. But that is part of our plan, is to make sure and add these 400 in this new parking garage out here will sure help in the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Ms. Joy?
And just to add to that, the county owns numerous parking lots throughout the city, and I believe there is an agreement that those can be used after hours. So again, it's just a matter of identifying it, if it's where it needs to be, and it may end up being, Mr. King, that somebody has to build one. Right now, we have one that's empty. You can't use it. Is that something you repurpose, or is it a tear down? We don't know at this point. But parking is there. It's just when, how, and where.
Thank you, Ms. Joy. Planning and zoning commissioners, anything from you, questions or comments? I see Joe McKay. Joe, you're on the ZBA. You've been involved in this for many years. Anything you'd like to add, or any questions you have?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks. Terry, anything from you, Mr. Holman? You know your way to the microphone up here. I didn't want to offend you by not asking you.
Thank you very much. The only thing that comes to my mind seeing this for me for this module for the first time is I respect that we sort of stayed with the same shapes of the zoning districts that we already have in the CB districts. I think flexibility is the key. For example, the old City Hall building is in an area that is general, which may be better suited for one of the other districts. So I think it's worth sort of a continual inventory in the downtown area and again, allow the uses to flex between the districts as much as possible. That's all I really had to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I heard Jason say something up to that end a while ago when he was making a comment. Okay. Okay. Any other? Are there? I mean, you run the risk when you open the microphone up, and if someone has a question that they feel like is pertinent and that would not be more appropriate at one of the open houses, Mr. Swiker, anything from you? Okay, you're good. Let's our 2040 plan leadership. Okay, Ms.
One last comment, question. I may be jumping ahead, but who's going to enforce this code?
Mr. Atkinson.
I was going to ask Mr. Isom to speak to that, and he was moving.
As far as the application of the code, that would come through the planning department. As far as any issues that we typically have now, it would still go through code enforcement. Code enforcement would be our real big enforcement tool as far as anything that doesn't fit within the code. But we would be the people that apply the code to the new developments, new building construction, things that go on.
Is that the question? Is that where you're headed?
Well, I can't imagine code enforcement enforcing this code in terms of the standards and all of that. I don't think we've got enough people in codes to do that. So, Mr. King, do you have any thoughts on that? I understand that Module 4 talks about enforcement. You have any thoughts?
Well, these are the same things that the city has been enforcing. It's about use, it's about land development regulations, setbacks, parking requirements. It's the same things, it's just a little different. There is a period of transition and of learning. Candy Keast has done a really good job working with staff. These codes don't require more enforcement. They don't require more attention. They are generally more flexible.
And I can also add that the public improvement design standards were something that were in existence, but there was no strong mechanism for enforcement. So we do understand that is something that's going to be new and different, but I think we'll overall have immense improvement on walking in downtown Lubbock, and will improve people getting from these faraway parking garages to the restaurant. They'll want to walk around. They won't need to park right in front of the restaurant. If we have great street trees and benches and lighting and such, that was in the public improvement design standards and now are included in the mixed use district standards. So I think that will be different and will require more enforcement, but I think it will have an overall good effect on downtown Lubbock.
Thanks. Thank you, Ally. Mr. Atkinson, it looked like you had something to add to that, and I'll go to Ms. Patterson-Harris after that.
Can I jump in, because he may
Yeah,
have
go
to?
ahead, go ahead,
Because my
please.
biggest concern when I hear all of this flexibility, and I'm just concerned that all of the flexibility is gonna cause some problems. What are you foreseeing as being some of the issues that we'll have to deal with? Because inevitably, they're coming, and they'll be there if this is where we are. So that's my concern. With so much flexibility, just sounds like we're gonna have some issues. And how do we manage that?
Sure. So some of the ones that we've talked about internally and that have been the biggest are encroachments into the right-of-way. You know, there's a lot of engineering concerns that we're working through them with along these design guidelines. And I think to speak to Councilwoman Joy, say construction is going on that's outside of what we approve with a permit, instead of, you know, code enforcement going out there, we'd actually send building safety inspectors. So we have additional enforcement tools. Code enforcement's typically our biggest one, but building safety provides their inspectors to go out there, issue stop work orders until these things are fixed and brought back into code. But yeah, the biggest one that I've seen so far, or that we've discussed so far, is the encroachments into setbacks and how we deal with those. A lot of this, instead of form following function, now it's function has to follow the form. They have to follow the building form. We think that helps to alleviate a lot of the concerns, because Jason and his team and Brian and Brett are able to design in some mitigation methods for uses to allow more flexibility with, you know, like an artist loft going next to a coffee shop. You know, I'd like to live next to a coffee shop, but, you know, they try to mitigate some of those factors through building design, site design, and things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson. Mr. Atkinson, you want to add to that?
Add just a little, and I'll go backwards. What do I see potentially as, you know, something that maybe hadn't been as high on the radar, and that's going to be your public improvement requirements. I know we've discussed those before. The general concepts that are being proposed today, really like them. It's not locking the use into a location. You're allowing a building to be used in different manners. I think that's going to help redevelopment. It's going to increase value of property. It's going to make things go faster. To enforce, remember that when this is done, it is still a code. So the entire mechanism is the same mechanism that we use today, and it begins before anything starts. It's where you have your planning department review, ultimately your building safety review, potentially other departments, fire marshal office, and a few others. Once a project's been approved, that's pretty much going to be building safety, and that's the same as it is today in any zone in any part of town. After the fact, it's built, it's done, it's open, it's in operation. If you've got issues then, that's generally when it falls to code enforcement at that point. So you're really looking at the majority of the departments involved in development services, really doing what they're doing today. You're just simply giving them a different set of definitions and allowable uses with which they'll work.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Please.
where does the zoning board of adjustment fit in?
Their authority and where they weigh in on a case remains the same as it is today. That's actually a statutory provision.
Okay, good.
So, Jason and Ally, I'd like you to comment on something. One of the things, one of the positives about the last 190 plus days is that we've discovered that we can eat outside.
Yeah, right.
And you know, if you've been to, Jason, you've probably not been to New Mexico, but if you drive through New Mexico, because of the governor's off and on, you want to be in the tent business, because every restaurant has found a way to put a tent up or to tarp an area. It's remarkable what's happened. But back to Texas, because we don't really care about those guys, the land of entrapment. But I followed closely what's happened in some big cities. New York last week extended their ability for restaurants to be out on into the street, into, I guess, what would be the parking in front of their buildings. we've had some folks locally do some real creative things with outdoor dining. It's become very popular, and it's, frankly, to me, it's one of the things that always made me scratch my head is with all the good weather we have between, April and maybe in some years even as late as Thanksgiving, why we didn't eat out more. With this plan, is there flexibility in this that would allow a restaurateur or maybe a bar owner to petition to certainly leave their sidewalk open, but to put dining in the street?
Yes, it does. Good points. The reason you don't eat outside is because your code made it illegal. The weather hasn't changed. People still want to be outside. And as you point out, in this era of pandemic, people want to eat outside more. And as you mentioned, along Buddy Holly Ave, on the Depot District, they've been taking over parking spaces right in front and turning it into outside dining. We make that legal. We expand the temporary uses section of the code in order to allow for that. We also count outdoor square footage differently than we used to when it comes to parking requirements and floor area requirements. What that means is there's an incentive to have an outdoor dining spot, Now, one of the things the code does get into, though, is the problems. The problem is there has to still be 5 feet of clear along the sidewalk in order for people to walk by. That means that sometimes you need a wide sidewalk. You need 5 feet for people to walk, you need 7 feet for the tables, you need a 13-foot sidewalk. So we have to keep allowing the sidewalks to be free, so people can move around on foot. But you still have some wide sidewalks, and if this is approved, yeah, it makes it a lot easier to eat outside.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Mr. Alderson.
Mr. Mayor, Council, question on, and this may be more about enforcement, not the going forward, but we have properties in downtown that are in need of some code enforcement, maybe cleaning up. Is there anything in this that would address or help us with some of the tougher properties?
It's a great question. We've looked at, well, let's start with the answer to that on what we have in front of us. Jason, anything in your plan, or Brian, whichever of you guys would like to address this?
Just to say that this code makes it easier to fix up a structure, to change its use, to reuse a structure without, again, rigorous requirements that were once there. However, and I'm interested to hear more about, the Overland Master Plan talks about something else. It talks about anti-blight. It talks about taxing differently. None of that is in this. This just makes it easier to reuse, recycle, rehabilitate. But I defer to the city about the very difficult question of blight. Thank you. Mr. Atkinson, Mr. Weaver, we've talked a little bit about a vagrancy ordinance. Can you summarize where we find ourselves right now? And Mr. Weaver, I don't want to catch you off guard on this one. Can you or one of your team talk about that?
You're talking about the registration of properties in vacant buildings?
Yeah,
or you're talking about
a little bit more like we looked at what San Antonio had done with the vagrancy ordinance. Excuse me.
You're saying
yeah,
vagrancy?
Vacancy. Yes. Excuse me. I said vagrancy. Vacancy. Yes. Well, they're sort of related in this case, but one draws the other.
Right.
But I know that it seems as I recall that in Texas there was the state code only permitted cities of a certain size to be able to do that. Does that sound right?
That's correct. I believe it has to be a municipality in a county of 2 million or more would allow for a vacancy ordinance, basically registering vacant buildings for a time and creating a database for that. because of the current state of the state law, Lubbock would not currently been able to take advantage of that. Yes, that's what you're referring to.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. Yes, thanks for clarifying. Mr. Atkinson, you want to add to that?
Well, would just add that, Mayor and Council, that is one of the topics we will have teed up for you at your strategic planning session, is to discuss what to do about the fact that that program is inaccessible to us today, and how might we go about making it accessible.
Okay.
And I think that would, I don't want to put words in Mr. Alderson's mouth. Some of what he's asking about, I truly believe, is just us attempting to enforce. But I think when you have something like those minimum standards in the vacancy registries, and ideally some programs to assist,
Right.
that's going to help.
Yeah.
We know that good activity will drive out other activity. If this makes it easier to have the good activity, I think you're going to see a victory.
Thank you. Okay. Other comments or questions? All right, so, Mr. Isom, could you come up and remind everybody about I know there's, if we had one open house already and there's another one pending, can you give folks they want to do a little deeper dive, when can they participate?
Sure, there's two. We have one tonight, starting at 7:30 in
Right
the
here,
lobby.
here, right.
And that one's going to be hosted by our Central Business District TIF Board. And we have another one that's going to be tomorrow night, starting at 6:30, that is hosted by Councilwoman Patterson Harris. Or that she'll be present at, I believe, in the lobby. Oh, it's hosted by Councilman Chavez. She's just doing the welcome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Mr. Chavez is out of town.
I didn't mean to spring that one on you.
Yeah, unexpectedly. Okay, yeah. She loves the microphone. She'll be just fine. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Atkinson or any members of staff, Ms. McCacken, you're good? Okay, all right. P&Z, anything from you guys?
We're good, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, if there's nothing else for the good of the Lubbock City Council, it is 6:38, and we're adjourned. Mr. Harris?
The P&Z board is now adjourned as well.
Thank you. Thanks for being here this evening.